Welcome to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Sports Leadership, a joint presentation brought to you by WISE Pittsburgh and Women in Industry at Point Park University. Before we begin, please keep in mind that this session is being recorded and it will be available to you posted at www.acceleratingwin.org. And for those in the audience, if you have questions for our panelists today, please use the Q&A function on Zoom, and you can submit your questions at any time throughout the session, and we will do our best to get to those audience questions. Point Park University Rowland School of Business Women in Industry Initiative is all about educating and empowering, accelerating the success of women-identified students and professionals, engaging leaders, affecting conversations, and encouraging experiences through elevation. So we are excited to have a number of different components of our Women in Industry program. Today's event is really part of our Fireside Fridays virtual discussions that we typically hold on the first Friday of most months. So now I'd like to welcome Kelly Hanna, the Executive Director of WISE Pittsburgh, to talk a little bit about the WISE initiative.
Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this wonderful fireside chat. Thank you to Jenna, Kinza, Cassandra, Sean, Jennifer, and Delvina for being our panelists and moderator today. WISE Pittsburgh is basically women in sports and events. It is the leading voice and resource for professional women in the business of sports and events. We navigate this association through ongoing meetings and special events and mentoring programs. Even through the pandemic, we've been able to wildly do that well. We also offer our members the opportunity to gain valuable insights and connections that can provide them a competitive edge in their current position as they advance in their careers. And WISE Pittsburgh is one of 32 chapters in the US and Canada. So we're really proud to be a part of this today and forward to all of the wonderful insights that everybody has to share. And Sandy, I'm going to pass it over to you, please.
So thank you, Kelly. I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event. We're very fortunate to have with us Jenna Harner. She is a sports anchor reporter at WPXI, and she has been in Pittsburgh for just about a year, covering the Steelers, Penguins, Pirates, Pitt, and more. Originally from South Windsor, Connecticut, she grew up as an avid sports fan and pursued a career in broadcast journalism. She started her career at WENY in Elmira, New York, where she won an Associated Press Award for Best Sports Coverage. After 2 years in Elmira, covering high school sports and NASCAR heavily, she moved to Buffalo, New York, and joined the sports team at WIVB. During her time in Buffalo, she covered the Bills, Sabres, and the University of Buffalo athletics. She covered the UB football's historic win in the 2019 Bahamas Bowl, the 2018 Dollar General Bowl, the UB women's basketball team in 2018 NCAA tournament run, and many regular season Sabres games. Thank you, Jenna, for joining us today and being our moderator.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Sandy, Doreen, and Kelly, to all of our panelists, and to all of you all for joining us on this beautiful Friday afternoon. I hope it's as lovely as it is wherever you are, where we are here in Pittsburgh. I just want to introduce our panelists. Our panel today is absolutely fantastic. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction to all of the incredible panelists that we have here with us today, starting with Kinza Bod. Kinza currently works as a pro scouting assistant for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Born and raised in Washington, D.C., she attended the National Cathedral School for Girls before going on to play softball at the University of Virginia. She joined the Pirates in May of 2017 and has since worked in the player evaluation and acquisition spaces. So Kinza, we're so glad to have you with us. Next is Cassandra Cooper. Cassandra is Manager of Diversity Learning with UPMC. She's a dynamic presenter, facilitator, and leader with over 25 years of professional experience. In her role at UPMC, she developed the diversity and inclusion curriculum and manages the team that delivers this learning for the organization. As a diversity practitioner, she recognizes the importance of ensuring a culture that understands the importance of diversity and what it truly means to be inclusive of others. She's active in her community where she holds leadership roles at her church and as a member of various organizations and boards. Cassandra is a graduate of Duquesne University, where she completed both her undergraduate and graduate studies and has been an adjunct member of the faculty there since 2007. She teaches a variety of business and leadership courses. So Cassandra, we are so happy that you are with us as well. Next is Sean L. Gibson, the great-grandson of Baseball Hall of Fame legend Josh Gibson. Sean has dedicated his life to the preservation of Josh's legacy and is the executive director of the Josh Gibson Foundation, a Pittsburgh area nonprofit organization. The Josh Gibson Foundation was established in 1994 in an effort to keep the memory of Pittsburgh's beloved Josh Gibson and the entire Negro Leagues alive. With a strong focus on education, the foundation currently serves roughly 300 children and plans to increase those numbers by starting new programs yearly. The foundation also sponsors the Josh Gibson Baseball Academy, and there's likely no greater expert on the history of the Negro Leagues than Sean, and I can attest to that because I interviewed him for a story on his great-grandfather a couple of weeks ago. But Sean speaks to a variety of groups teaching on the significance of these great men who played the game before Jackie Robinson integrated baseball in 1947. So Sean, we are so glad to have you here with us as well today. Next is Jennifer Hawkins. Jennifer is the executive director of Sports Pittsburgh, a division of Visit Pittsburgh that oversees all B2B and B2C sales, operations, and marketing functions related to sports and associated events. During her tenure, she and her staff have dramatically increased the exposure of Sports Pittsburgh brand and helped drive home the image of a legendary and authentic sports city. She is a member of Women in Sports and Events, sits on the Executive Advisory Committee for Connect Sports, serves on the board of P3R, owner of the Pittsburgh Marathon, and is a past board member of the National Association of Sports Commissions. Prior to joining Visit Pittsburgh, Ms. Hawkins spent several years with the Tallahassee Sports Council and Space Coast Sports Promotions. She earned her master's degree in sports administration from Florida State University and a bachelor's degree in kinesiology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So Jennifer, we are so excited to have you here as well. And finally, last but most certainly not least, Delvina Lorraine Smith-Morrow serves as the Director, Strategic and Community Initiatives with the Pittsburgh Penguins and is responsible for managing key external projects and initiatives relating to the redevelopment of the former Civic Arena, the 28-acre Lower Hill redevelopment, which will have a significant impact on the Hill District and entire Pittsburgh region. Delvina oversees the organization's corporate social responsibility efforts and serves as a liaison between the Penguins and various community, charitable, and business organizations. Additionally, in her role, Delvina is co-chair for the Pittsburgh Penguins Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. In 2017, Delvina was named by the Pittsburgh Business Times as one of the inaugural class of its 30 under 30 honorees, as an honoree for Who's Next 2019, technology presented by The Incline, and a graduate of the Leadership Pittsburgh LDI class of 2018. So we are so excited to have all of you here with us. And we're going to jump right into our discussion. Cassie, to begin our discussion today, can you provide some background or context on diversity, equity, and inclusion and its impact? More specifically, how does a focus on those three things really benefit organizations, and going a little bit broader here, but society as a whole?
So thank you very much, Jenna. I'm happy to kick it off and happy to be here with such a distinguished panel of experts in this area. You know, when I think about diversity, and I always define it based on something I read once, it's the undeniable presence of difference and the understanding that difference is a part of whatever organization that we are a part of. That can be work, that can be school, that can be church, whatever it is, but understanding that difference exists, right? And then taking it to that next level from the standpoint of understanding how important it is to recognize, acknowledge, and provide that insight and understanding and support for what is different and different within the individuals in our organizations. I think that's critical, because that then leads to true equity and ensuring that we are working to find and provide access to all, no matter the differences. I think organizations benefit from the standpoint of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core focus through, again, a lot of the benefits that really come from it: innovation and creativity, better problem solving. When we think about it from the standpoint of teams, better team cohesion and being able to work together, understanding differences, not just tolerating them, which is, again, I think, so different from what real true inclusion is all about. It's not just tolerating the fact that someone is different, it's understanding and working to support and value those differences. When I share information with our executive workforce, I talk a lot about, not only does it help to ensure there's a mitigation from the standpoint of risk, right? Understanding what diversity, equity, and inclusion means helps to ensure that our people know the right things to do and are not just being compliant. They are treating others with dignity and respect, and that is so, I think, important. And then lastly, because I can talk a lot, Jenna, about this subject, but I think the other side of it for any organization that's looking to make a profit, it's understanding that true diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts do impact the bottom line. In our world today, I think that's important, whatever the field or industry, due to the fact that most people are quite aware of some of the challenges that we have from the standpoint of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as a consumer, as someone who watches sports television, right, or is into sports, we're concerned and we want to see that people who are different are valued and supported. And again, not treated equally, but ensuring that equity and access is available. So I think that's why, again, it's really important that we focus on this and love having the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. And there is just such a broad conversation to be had. I know there's so many people that look at equality and equity and almost put them as the same thing. And there's the big realization that that's not entirely the case. They're two totally different things. And there's so many conversations that are continuously being brought up and should be had regarding both of those things. I want to remind all of you guys too, as panelists, this can kind of be more of a free-flowing discussion. So if you do have a point that, someone makes that you want to jump in on, please feel free to do that, as well as we kind of move through our questions and our discussion here. I guess I'll start off with Jennifer, or whoever really wants to take this one. Again, please feel free. If I direct a question towards you and you don't want it, please be like, okay, we'll switch it up. But Jennifer, we can start, historically, how has marginalization, underrepresentation, or exclusion in society really impacted sport both on and off the field?
Sure. Well, let me start off by saying thank you all for having me on the panel today. And I just want to give a big caveat. You saw in the description, it is about sports and diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders. I am on the sports side. So I'm by no means a subject matter expert in diversity and inclusion, but I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. And in all honesty, I'm on a DEI board for P3R also, and it has pushed me to be more engaged and to really understand the differences between those three terms. Sometimes you take for granted, I'm a Black female, I sort of automatically know all these things, and that what I've learned is it's not true. So I just want to preface it with that. And I don't directly answer the question, but what I'll say is one of my first eye openers, and this was years ago when I was in school, was we read a book called The $40 Million Slave, written by Bill Roden. For those of you who haven't, it's a great place to start because it really does talk about the journey of the African, really coming from England to America, the athlete, and how they went basically from being on the plantation, and fighting and competing for their masters to where we are it goes up to about 10 or 20 years ago. And it's like, you're still just a $40 million slave because you're still working for the masters of, you know, the NBA, the NFL, and MLB. And I think it's interesting, I'm waiting for Bill to write part 2, because I'd love to hear what he says about what's this next step. Because what you've seen is those athletes who have gone from the game changing under their feet over the last number of decades to now starting to use their voice. You know, the difference between Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan of the 90s and the early 2000s to, I mean, Bubba Wallace in NASCAR. Like, you just never would have thought it would really speak out about equity and diversity and the lack of inclusion, especially, you know, racial and ethnically. So I say all this to say the change is still happening. We all know it, you know, tangibly, but I think we're on another wave of what does it look like now that we are free, feeling free and comfortable to use our voice.
And I'd like to add on that, Jenna, if that's okay. You know, really great points, Jennifer. And athlete activism isn't a new phenomenon. You know, there has been a generational shift thanks to social media that has given athletes a louder voice directly to their fans, to the front office, and to the world. And that's the major change. Black athletes specifically have been fighting for their rights since, you know, Fleetwood to Jesse Owens to Kaepernick, and the collective power of the player now has been harnessed more than ever before, I think mostly due to the ongoing showcase of social injustices within our communities. Racial and social injustice has impacted all sports, and I think it's up to the different leagues and teams to really harness that and go about making change and being very strategic about how they do that.
I think that's a great point, Delvine. And if I could just jump in for a second and say that, you know, all of this work will continue, in my opinion, to evolve. I think back 3 years ago when I created the diversity and inclusion curriculum at UPMC, and in one particular session on unconscious bias, wanting to start that discussion off with what was going on with Colin Kaepernick. And again, how his actions in protesting, right, the injustices suffered by Black men at the hands of white police officers, and include that as a part of the unconscious bias learning I was doing. Now, I was cautioned slightly about using that example, right? And I think today it's interesting, after the murder of George Floyd and all of the protests that have happened after that, right? Even when we think about Asian Americans and everything that's going on there, how the discussion has changed, how, again, these incidents or these discussions around race and ethnicity and inequities that exist is really now more, I think, welcomed in many organizations and sports as well. And I think that's important, even as we think about it from a gender perspective. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah.
I agree. Sorry, Jenna.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say I agree with everything that's been said. I can't believe, as a proud Wahoo, I can't believe I'm agreeing with a Seminole in Jennifer, but here we are. But, you know, coming at this question from a little bit of a different perspective that I have, which is much more in the player side of sports and in the playing side of sports, the way that marginalization, underrepresentation, and exclusion has impacted sports is it has caused teams to lose ball games, to lose football games, to lose hockey games. And that comes from the minor examples that we have today where, you know, let's say a player has 100 liters of gas in their tank, in their proverbial metaphorical energy tank. Well, throughout this summer, our Black players were spending that energy, rightly so, pushing it forward, and Black players have been dealing with this since baseball has been integrated. They've been putting their energy not toward winning a ball game, but dealing with this extra layer of inequity, exclusion, racism, every aspect of their day. And that's tough. It's tough to deal with all that and then have enough energy to win a ball game. But there are also larger examples with Sean's great-grandfather. I mean, he is the greatest hitter to ever live, full stop. And because of racism and marginalization, he did not play on the Pittsburgh Pirates. Imagine how many more games the Pittsburgh Pirates could have won with him in the batting order. So to me, that's part of why I get very excited as a woman in sports who wants to, you know, advance. I get very excited as a human being that people are becoming more comfortable to come into work. Our players are becoming more comfortable in the clubhouse. But this advancement that, you know, Delvina and Cassie and Jennifer were talking about is really exciting to me, because it makes me think this is a great way that we can win more ball games. Because if our players are comfortable in the world and comfortable in the clubhouse, they're going to be comfortable on the field and have enough energy to go, you know, kick the butt of the Chicago Cubs like we did yesterday.
This is incredible. And Sean, actually, this is kind of a perfect tie-in. I want to lead this a little bit to you, but can you talk a little bit about, you know, history in regard to baseball and share some of the work that you've been doing with the Josh Gibson Foundation to promote inclusion and equity, along with the role of women specifically in the Negro League?
First of all, I want to say, look, you see, if everybody knows the picture, I'm the only guy on this photo, on this panel. So first of all, I want to say thank you to my good friend Doreen for having me on here, for inviting me to this, and be able to be on this panel. Hope I can keep up with all the great women on this panel. So, but, you know, just get right into it. You know, as Kenza said, you know, you're talking about the history of the Negro Leagues. Last year, we celebrated our 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. And it's a shame that when I speak to people about this, is that here we are going through a 100th anniversary, and Black people are still going through the same things that my grandfather went through 100 years ago. And I know he's up in heaven thinking, like, he would never imagine that his grandson, his great grandson, his family is going through the same struggles that he went through in the 1920s and 30s. And that's how crazy that is. You talk about 100th anniversary, we're still going through some of the same things. But when it comes to baseball history, I mean, you know, as we all know, Major League Baseball finally made a big step in December to integrate Negro League stats into the Major League Baseball records, which will now make Josh Gibson not only the greatest Black baseball player, but the greatest baseball player of all time. So it's very exciting for us. And you know, I know this is a women in sports panel, and I'll talk about the history of the Negro Leagues with women. I mean, you're talking about Manley, who some of you may or may not heard of, who was one of the owners of the Newark Eagles, who won a championship in 1946. But the interesting story about Manley, you know, she was a white woman who portrayed herself as an African-American woman and was married to Abe Manley, who was her husband, who owned the Eagles. And so not just that, though, she's the first and only woman into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so when you talk about the Negro Leagues, it talks about things that's happening today. And the other great things about the women in Negro Leagues, you're talking about the three players they had. Tony Stone in 1952, Mamie Peanut Johnson was a very good friend of mine in our family, and Connie. You know, these are three players that also played in Negro League. So when you talk about the history and you talk about women pioneers, these women were doing it back when it was segregation. They were still struggling. And they pioneer for today's work like a Bianca Smith, which is very exciting. The woman from the Florida Marlins, Kim Ing, you know, these opened up a lot of these women, a lot of these things that the Negro League's done in women in baseball is definitely opening up doors for today. You know, and a few years ago, I'm pretty sure we all heard about Monet Davis, the young lady who played baseball. I mean, she was phenomenal. She took the world by storm, you know, Sports Illustrated, Little League World Series. And so when you talk about women in sports, it's definitely have come a long way. I just saw recently where they're trying to get to equal pay with women in sports, and hopefully that will happen soon. I was seeing a story where the WNBA, the #1 draft pick, I forgot the young lady's name from Stanford, #1 overall pick only got $60,000. That's crazy compared to the NBA. And so when we talk about women in sports, you know, we're talking about the on the field activity as well as off the field management positions. And I'll leave with this. I definitely believe the Black Lives Matter movement has definitely helped a lot of this. People ask me this question all the time. Do you think what took Major League Baseball so long to integrate Negro League stats? Well, look what's going on in the world right now. But I will say this for the listeners and even the panel. If you're in that position, you know, we don't want it to be a one and done thing. You know, you get these one and doners and you're riding the wave for the moment. If we're really serious about making a change, it doesn't happen when it's a Black Lives Matter movement. It should happen next 30, 40, 50, 100 years.
Absolutely. It's constant work, constant conversation, constant progress to move forward and create that equity and create that inclusion that, especially right now, I mean, it's during the pandemic, I think everything has been heightened so much even more, but the fact that there are all of these conversations continuously happening, the pandemic really has presented a lot of challenges for sports organizations. And I'm going to pose this one to Cassie, Delvina, whoever really wants to take this, but how, I guess, have inclusion and equity efforts been impacted during the pandemic, or has there been some struggles with the fact that we're going through something that I don't think anybody in their lives anticipated that we would go through?
I'll jump in and just say that I think it definitely has been impacted. I think, the things that we've been able to see since we have not been in our office, the things that we've been able to engage in, actively engage in, where diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned, I think have really put it in the forefront for many organizations. I've never seen so many job career opportunities for diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners prior to the pandemic. I think a lot of that started most definitely with the, again, the murder of George Floyd and everything that happened there, the Black Lives Matters movement. And I think organizations started to understand that they had almost that social responsibility to do more than what Josh said, the one and done, right? To click the box or check the box and say, yeah, we do diversity training, so we are diverse. And we all know that it takes so much more than that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has to be embedded into the very fabric and fiber of an organization so that it's able to be a part of the culture. When that doesn't happen, or when that isn't happening, I think that you continue to see a lot of the things that were perpetuated, right, where underrepresented minorities are concerned, where women are concerned, and these great gaps in pay. You never see change in those things if we are not really focused. And I think it starts as well with having people within the organization, no matter how small, right, really engaged in what it means to have true diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts happen as a part of their organization. And so I think that's my thought. Yeah, we have work to do, but the focus is there. And I think we have to ride that momentum and keep it going.
Yeah, I agree with Cassie 100%. The NHL had announced a series of initiatives focused on fighting the fight against racism and making hockey more welcoming and inclusive. And our CEO, David Morehouse, joined the Executive Inclusion Committee, which then created a ripple effect in which our club was able to start our very first DEI council led by Tracy McCants-Lewis, our VP of HR and Deputy General Counsel. And since starting this DEI council, we've been very intentional about DEI as a whole. It's always been something that's been spoken about in our organization, but now you don't just see it on the ice, you see it in our office. So, for example, for Black History Month, we had 4 programs that were open to the public throughout the entire month of February. So, we had over 900 participants throughout the month engaging in really great virtual programming. But what a lot of people don't know is that we also had 3 programs just for our staff to build, opportunities for us to come together, to learn, to engage. And we're doing that for every initiative that we have going on. So for Gender Equality Month, we have programming. For Pride Month, we have programming. For Earth Day, History Month, we have programming. So for us, obviously, when hockey stopped, our business didn't. We continued to find ways to bring people together. At the height of the pandemic, we were doing food drives, making sure that people in our community were, having access to food. We did a diaper drive. We've done so much to try to address some of the inequalities that we've seen, whether it's tied to hockey or not.
And those Black History Month programs were incredible, by the way. We were part of those, and they were really, really awesome conversations to be had, especially the one with P.O. Joseph and with kids in the community. That was just so incredible. And these are, again, it's just these seemingly little initiatives that mean so much, that so many more people are being brought into not only the conversation, but given a lot more light and understanding and being able to have these types of conversations. This question is actually from the Point Park University WISE student chapter, and it is a really, really good one. How has the recent countrywide focus on diversity issues, such as the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality, impacted the advancement of diversity and inclusion in sport? Well, any one of you can feel free to take this, especially because I know seeing the city of Pittsburgh as a whole through the height of this movement and seeing all the conversations that the Steelers were having, the Penguins were having, the Pirates were having, this city, these sports teams seemingly want to continue to make a difference, and they've been seemingly taking those steps forward to doing so. I say Jennifer, Sean, yeah, Sean, please.
So that, I will say this. I know somebody mentioned Colin Kaepernick and the things that he were going through, and he did. We've had a lot of murders with African Americans throughout the years, right? And I don't know, for some reason, the George Floyd just took a wave. And now you see all these NFL players have a player alliance. NBA has a player alliance. NHL has a player alliance. MLB has a player alliance. It seemed like maybe enough was enough. And finally, people who had a voice and had that platform, especially the athletes, and not even just the athletes, some of the actors, and some of the white athletes came out, and some of the white actors came out. And I think it just took it went to another level. And as somebody mentioned earlier, with the social media platform, that helps too. But I think that with everything that's happening, and especially in sports, with everybody getting involved and players stepping up. I mean, you just saw how the NBA, where they wear different slogans on the back of their jerseys now, under their names. Recently at the All-Star game, the NBA donated all this money to HBCU schools. I mean, there's a lot going on, but I think the most important thing is that we're finally getting people who have that platform, Black and white, to actually speak up for this systemic racism, number one, in social justice. But it's really given us an opportunity to really see people step up to the plate. And I'm excited about it. I mean, like I said, I just wanted to continue though, but it's a great thing that finally people with platforms are using their platform to help this cause.
If I could jump in on that, I would say, Sean is absolutely right. Like that George Floyd, I have my opinions on why it hit so close to home and people all of a sudden were like, oh, they weren't lying. But that it had such a strong emotional tie on people. And I'm going to quote a very good friend of mine, because she was like, here's the funny thing about knowledge. You can't unlearn something. They have been exposed. Now they know. They've heard about it. We've all heard about it. And you can't say you didn't know anymore. So what are you going to do about it? So like Sean said, it's like we want to see progress happening, and no one in these United States can say they didn't know and they don't understand. They may not agree, but they know.
Jennifer, I agree with that. Just to jump in real quick. And I think one of the things that, COVID and the pandemic, and I said it earlier, gave us the opportunity to engage and see. And I remember the day sitting in my dining room with the television on and watching that tape and watching the video of George Floyd. And I remember and experienced it just the other day when I watched it in the courtroom procession in the opening arguments, and just what I felt, it reopened it. And I think that was something that was really very pivotal. It was a pivotal point in that, again, it wasn't a video that we saw, quote unquote, on the news for 30 seconds. It was 8 minutes and 54 seconds, I believe, or almost 9 minutes of watching it, which gave you the opportunity not only to see, but to experience. And I think that took it to a whole different level for people of color and allies, right? I think our allies in all of this were then able to say, you know what, yeah, this is real, it is happening. And if we don't make a stance, if we don't start having the discussions about race, racism, systemic racism, then again, nothing is going to change. And I think it was at that point too that we saw a whole change with DE&I in the way that we practice it, right? Because I think even in my own organization where we have very, very open conversations, right? And I think I heard, candid coffee chats, whatever you want to call them, but where we are really looking to facilitate dialogue, meaningful dialogue, to ensure that there is understanding, but more than that, so that we can move forward, so that we can start looking at policies and practices that are in place that have been in place for many years that need to be addressed, right? So that we can really start to do those things. So yeah, I don't know if I answered it, but I think that was a very pivotal, powerful point in changing the tide on how we look at race and racism.
Cassie, we had a similar
And
experience.
just to jump,
Sorry, Delina, you can go ahead.
no, you can go.
I was just gonna say, Cassie, we had a very similar experience here at the Pirates, and to preface this, obviously, I present as white. I'm an Arab American. I was able to grow up in DC, in an incredibly culturally diverse place, and I'm really thankful that my parents decided to raise me that way, where I grew up aware of these things. For me, there was a shock because I was unaware of how unaware many of my colleagues, players, teammates were about these issues. And I had a really interesting conversation 2 weeks after George Floyd's murder with one of our old scouts. He's probably 65, not that's old, but he's been around baseball for a long time. And he was in Los Angeles watching UCLA play the night of the Rodney King murder, and I asked him to contrast the two incidents because I wanted to understand where have we come as a country, where have we come as an organization. And he mentioned that he was ashamed that it was just a passing blip for him. Our scouting department was 100% white at the time, and we never really talked about it as a department. It was just another incident. Same thing as a tax raise. But because of the pandemic, and because of social media, and because of all these things, this issue was forced in our heads. And I don't want to use the word luckily because that seems obtuse to use about a murder, but it happened right as the baseball world was escalating their time frame, and they're gearing up ready for season. They're so excited, this is going to be a great year. For us, it was Ben's first year. It was Derek Shelton's first year. Actually, well, I was his second year, but our first full year, and we were very excited. And everything stopped because of the pandemic, and everyone had all this mental juice and needed to use it somewhere, and this was what was there. So we were able to have these incredibly important, deep, vulnerable conversations, player to player, player to coach, player to scout, scout to scout, etc. So it's allowed us to really take a hard look, all of us, no matter how people identify, at these issues in our own organization, but also out in the world, and really it has really allowed us to start our own DE&I task force. We have 3 different verticals with our business operations, baseball operations, and community operations. I'm obviously in our baseball operations one. And it's allowed us to springboard this forward and really get the ball rolling. And so far, we've made significant change within our organization and hope to do it in the future, not only in our organization, but in the greater Pittsburgh world.
And just to follow up on both, everyone's points, Cassie and Kinza, you both talked about allyship and talking about it, and that's so important. So, there's no secret that hockey is a predominantly white sport. There are some really great advances in changing that. The Penguins and the Flyers, they stood together against social injustice and racism and hate ahead of one of our exhibition games. And I think that really spoke to people. This is a group typically of white men who are saying enough is enough. I think everyone at this point was just like, we need to stop. We need to stop. We need to reflect, and we need to see how we can actually put policy or action in place to make a difference. Within our organization, we have, for years been working to advance opportunities for Black youth to play and have exposure to hockey. And our foundation recently announced that we are launching the Willie O'Ree Academy, sponsored by Dick's Sporting Goods. So we have a lot in the works to continue in advancing that work. And it takes time and it takes the commitment. Again, I spoke about that trickle down, and it's not just David Morehouse, but it's the hockey ops, it's the NHL, it's really everyone, and the players, working to make sure that we're making a difference and advancing, and that this isn't just, a moment. This is a movement. Kim Davis, she always says, this is a movement, not a moment. And so we all have to have that same mentality in order for this change to really be lasting.
A lot of you guys mentioned the word being an ally and allyship. And I think those conversations are so important. Just being an ally, how to be an ally. As someone, I'm white and my heart hurts for everything that has happened, and seeing, more than just George Floyd and his horrific murder, but, there are so many things where I sit there and I, want to do more, and how can I be an ally? And I think a lot of people are asking those types of questions right now. So how can individuals be allies in sports? And I think especially right now too, how can people even increase their allyship, whether it's, male men trying to help women, white men and women, making sure that there is equity when, among Black individuals, things along those lines.
Well, I'll jump in as the ally in this group when it comes to racial issues. I think it's incredibly important, and this is, a woman-centered group, to remind everyone to check, for those that also present as white, to check our own privilege when it comes to being an ally. Because yeah, it's really hard to be a woman in sports. It is not as hard to be a woman in sports as it is to be a Black person in America. Full stop. It's just not. And I think about this all the time. My mentor here at the Pirates, Stevie Williams, who is like a second father to me, is African-American and was one of the first African-American scouts in the game. And for a long time was like the only African-American pro scouting director. And when he and I go into a field, when we walk into the field, it's harder for me to get my ticket sometimes. Sometimes I get stopped by security and they think I'm a player wife, so they want to send me to the player wife suite, which isn't so bad because there are good snacks in there. And I frankly usually go grab the snacks and then come back down to my seat. But me driving to the game, I never have to think about anything. He has to. When I leave the field, all of being a woman in sports is done and it's over with. He still takes being a Black man in America with him. So it's really important for us to understand that when we try to be allies to our Black coworkers, our Black players, Black bosses, et cetera, to remember that the prejudice they have to deal with is 24/7. For us, it's 9 to 5.
I just jump in and say, I love what you said. I think that is so powerful. And I think even as we think about, as you said, what does it really take to be an ally? I think that education from the standpoint of what privilege means, right? I think bias is huge in it. Part of the curriculum that I teach is all around unconscious bias. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And really understanding that as Black people and white people, we navigate the world very differently, just like as men and women, right? The world is navigated very differently. And I think having that understanding of privilege and racism, systemic racism especially, I think is critical. I helped in the creation of a course with Pitt, just from the standpoint of oversight and just adding some reinforcement in the course, and it was all on the history of race and racism, right? There were things that I learned in that course as a Black woman that I did not know. So I think a huge part of it is the education, the acceptance, the education, right? And then action, right? An ally means that I am going to work with you to ensure that change happens. I'm not just going to sit on the sideline. I'm not just going to talk a good game. I'm going to be right there with you. I think one of the things that I've seen, even as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, is so many allies within that group that when you look at it, it's just like, wow, right? I am sorry that it took what happened to happen. But I think I love when I see all of us, right, together working to ensure that, racism is addressed, racism is eradicated, whatever the right word is there. But I think it takes, just to go back to it, education, acknowledgement, and I think action are three things that I think about from the standpoint of allyship.
Cassie, I love that you said, work with you. And I think that's so important when you talk about allyship. Oftentimes I think people think, let me read a book, or let me just ask, my Black friend or coworker how I can, solve this issue. And that's not the way it works. So I think you need to, really listen and learn from your Black colleagues and their experiences. And, so if you have an ERG group, join that group, be a part of that, and really listen and be a part of that group. Engage with your diverse colleagues in casual settings. So it's more than just, obviously right now, people aren't meeting up for happy hours and things of that nature, but find ways and reasons to connect with, your colleagues, whether again, men, women, Black, Asian, white, it doesn't matter, find those reasons to really connect with people in a very authentic way. Ask, your diverse employees and colleagues about their work and their goals. You never know where someone's coming from, and you can learn something from them, and vice versa. And again, with creating those connections, like you're not only now being an ally, but you're creating stronger connections in your organization that keep you happy, I personally think. And then, provide your Black colleagues with opportunities, suggestions, encouragement, and general support. So if you're a part of, a project, is there a way that you can bring someone along with you? Can you help to lift people? I think in all that we do, as an organization, as a part of a team, you should be constantly thinking, well, how can I bring the next person along with me? How can I open doors for that person, whether they're Black, white, male, female, but keeping in mind who's not in the room. Like if you have all the same people around the table coming up with the same ideas, I guarantee you it's not a good idea. So stop and think and bring those other people to the table, because you will look at things from a very different way, and it will help to only better advance what you're trying to do.
And bringing in different viewpoints too, it's so crucial. It's so important, because again, like you said, if you're sitting around the table and so many people that have, that are like-minded are thinking of the same thing, not only are things going to stay the same, but it doesn't seem like there is going to be progress moving forward. And it's just so crucial to be able to have that, every day, but especially, right now, as we solve all of the challenges or try to tackle as many as there are in our paths in front of us. And you guys kind of mentioned this a little bit too, but this question comes from the University of Pittsburgh and Duquesne University Y student chapters. But what are some tools that students can use to educate themselves when it comes to diversity and inclusion in sports? And they asked, how can we as students challenge ourselves to be part of the increasing change regarding diversity and inclusion in sports?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Derek. So, the first thing I would say as far as students, definitely get out there, do some volunteers. There's a lot of organizations out there and a lot of nonprofits out there that you can go and work into the community. You got Pitt and Duquesne. You got one of the biggest African communities right in between you guys, the Hill District. There's a lot of opportunities with the churches, the YMCAs, the nonprofits. I will say that first and foremost, get out there, do some volunteer work. You get organizations like the Penguins, the Pirates, the Steelers also as well, doing some stuff as volunteer work as well with the DNEI. And, I think the most important thing is that if, when we talk about these subjects, and allies, it's people who really wants to support it though. You really have to, because I get a lot of friends that say a lot of things, but are really serious. In social media, you see who your friends really are too sometimes. And a lot of things come out on social media. And so, but you really have to be serious about yourself if this is something you seriously really want to do. But as far as the students, I would say definitely go out there and do some volunteer work with some communities, some outreach work. There's several, like you said, African-American communities in the area that you can definitely go out there and do some volunteer work.
And I think that's great, Josh. If I could jump in just to say again, I think a lot of it has to be intentional, right? There's the awareness. I think the awareness of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our city as a whole, right? I think there's the awareness of the lack thereof. So there has to be that intentionality through, as you said, efforts within the communities, through other efforts as well. But I think as well, our organizations, our universities have to ensure that as a part of their curriculum, they are teaching and educating our young people, right? Where diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned. It can't just be up to them to try to figure it out. And the one thing I know as well is a lot of our students are more woke than some of the older people anyway. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important to them. So I think being intentional from the standpoint of finding, as you said, Josh, those opportunities to engage in community, to engage in education. And then again, it has to be intentional is my thought. So.
And to follow up on that, you know, I remember when I was in college, I was a part of the Caribbean Student Association. I was the only Black student that was a part of Hillel, which is a Jewish student organization. And so, you know, even if you don't identify as those groups, still be a part of those groups. I was a part of our LGBTQ organization. And then also, you know, obviously right now with COVID, things are just weird and funky in so many ways. But, you know, I assume most of you have, you know, LinkedIn that are focused on DEI, and they're free for students. So take advantage of those courses and really try to educate yourself in the interim.
I'll speak up. I think coming from like in sports specifically, if you're trying to just be a part of it, I go back to what Cass said, you have to be intentional because I would say by definition, diversity is a broad spectrum, right? Just basic definition of the word is, you know, we want to help everyone, but if you try to take on everything, you could get lost pretty quickly, especially if you're not a DE&I professional. So start with be intentional. What are you passionate about? Know the history of it. So in sports, I go back to reading up the history of inequity, injustice, and exclusion through sports. And that's not just, you know, ethnically, not just with African Americans, talking about physical disabilities, religion. You can run the gamut, and obviously gender biases in sports. So know the history, and that will help you to see the challenge and see the problem when it comes your way. Listen. You don't have to agree. I have to tell myself this all the time. I don't have to agree with what you're saying, but I need to listen. And it might plant a seed, right? It helps me notice when somebody's not in the room. It helps me to notice when someone isn't being heard. And then I can speak up for them and kick it back like, why are we only asking ourselves these questions? But you have to listen, you have to be aware, and that's just knowing the challenges that are there and how we've gotten to where we are. So I think step one is just know for yourself what you're trying to accomplish, and then you can really be intentional in that regard.
That I totally agree. And just to emphasize Jennifer's point about, and the points that everyone made about knowing the history of all of these issues is huge. And, you know, I totally get young students. I'm not a young student anymore, but I'm 25 and, you know, I'm wearing a white turtleneck. I'm cool, I'm hip, but like, we need to remember that just because our generation is woke and with it, or whatever term, cool hip term we want to use, like, we need to understand that these issues have been going on way before us. And I highly recommend, you know, whenever you guys get an internship with a sports organization that you love, or you're going to a different city to work for a sports team or sports organization, learn about the history of that city when it comes to these issues, the city and the team. So like, let's say, for example, if you're going to come work for us, the Pittsburgh Pirates, like, read about Josh Gibson, read about Branch Rickey, who for a time was our general manager and dealt with a lot of these issues. Branch Rickey eventually going on to sign Jackie Robinson. Read the plays of August Wilson, learn about the Hill District, learn about the situation you're getting yourself into so you can best understand how can I push these things forward within the framework of this city. Because if a thought's in your head and you think it's going to work in your head, doesn't mean it's going to work in the city, in the organization that you're joining.
And I think it might have been, I want to say it might have been Jennifer, but I'm not sure. Someone made the point too, that once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. So there are so many crucial things when it comes to just gaining knowledge and understanding everything that led up to this point. And the fact that, you know, especially systemic racism, it isn't anything new, but the conversation surrounding it, the fact that athletes can have more of a platform to speak out against it, that more is being done to combat it right now. That is that movement that seems to keep trending. And I think that is something that kind of, you want to keep the ball rolling in that sense, and you can be a part of it by doing the work, by gaining knowledge, by asking these types of questions. We do only have a few minutes remaining, so I do want to kind of pose our final question to all of our panelists, and you guys can kind of just bounce off one another like you've been doing so wonderfully. What next steps would you advise the audience to take in an effort to support and encourage inclusion and equity in sports? We did kind of touch on it a little bit, but if you had to, you know, one or two things specifically or in a broader term that you would encourage the audience to do.
I can double down on what I was going to say is, especially in sports, know the history, you know, be intentional, know your history, ask questions, and be open to the answers. And I did want to say, and don't get discouraged. It has taken hundreds of years to get to where we are. We will not clean it up, you know, in a year of a pandemic. We got a lot of extra intention because we were at home and we got to focus, but it is going to take time, and the little things you do will take us a long way. Thank you.
I'll jump in and just say I agree with that. I think, you know, as you reflect to where we were in the example, I think that was given when the Rodney King episode or issue or challenge happened, and where we are today, again, you know, it was a blip, and we don't want this to be a blip. So I think stay engaged, stay motivated, right? Understand, as one of the other panelists said, that the small steps add up, and that they do lead to the change that we want to see. So I think in it, don't lose heart, keep the momentum, right? Get involved, stay active, all of the things that I think that the panel has really addressed. And I think that is really important as we move forward, so that all of the efforts that have been made to date, right? And even just the momentum, as I said, that we have right now, that is sustained. So.
I agree with both of those points. And so 3 things: authenticity is key. So if this is not something that pulls at your heartstrings right now, figure that out. Take time to figure out where you fit in this space before you join it, because it is a lot of work and it's not glamorous. And so you really want to make sure that you're going to be dedicated. If you are an intern, you know, interning it within a sports organization or anywhere, ask about these groups. If there isn't a group, offer to do research, offer to, you know, provide some insight on how the organization could potentially implement an ERG group or something of that nature. And if you're within an organization and you don't see it, talk to your HR. I'm sure your HR leadership is already thinking about this, and knowing that staff members are also will help.
Going at it from, I think, I mean, what all you guys just said is really impactful. And I think it's important, if we want to sustain this momentum, we have to keep an open and willing heart and come at it from a place of authenticity. As Alvina, it's actually like 100%. And I know that it's easy for me to say that, because, you know, it's easier for me to keep an open heart when dealing with issues of racism, because they don't affect me directly. I look like I'm white. They don't affect me directly. So it's easier for me to, when someone makes a comment that's racist or inappropriate, it's easier for me to take that than it is for a Black colleague. So I know that some of this, just coming from that perspective, but it's really important that we try to keep an open heart. And when we're having a conversation with someone who maybe right now doesn't have the heart posture that we want them to have, work with them, don't work against them, because we're not going to win these battles, especially when it comes to being a woman in sports. We're not going to win the battle by coming in and being super combative. We have to come in, work our butts off, prove that we're worthy, prove that we're worth it, and ascend step by step, slowly, and eventually will create an equitable environment for everyone.
Well, we do unfortunately only have 1 minute, so I just want to say a quick thank you for our heart out, but thank you so much to all of the panelists. You guys provided such incredible knowledge and context and everything, and this was just an absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you all. Thank you to Kelly and Sandy and Doreen and everybody for putting this on and making this conversation possible. This was absolutely incredible. So thank you all so much, and everybody have a great Friday and just a fantastic weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Easter as well.
Bye.